Good evening and welcome to the final session in the Total Transformation Seminars. Tonight's topic is our 10th presentation in this series and will focus on the impact of COVID on our mental health. And I'm pleased to welcome our two presenters this evening, Dr. Beatrice Kastrati, who we have heard from before in a previous presentation a few weeks ago, and Andrea Edwards, who is a psychotherapist. Now, Juliet is going to be our moderator this evening. And again, we ask that if you have any questions or comments, that you place them in the chat and Juliet will pick them up and present them to our presenters. So thank you again for joining us, and I'll hand over now to our moderator for this evening, Juliet. You're muted, Juliet.
Thank you, Leroy. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. As Leroy said, my name is Juliet and I'm your moderator for this evening. We'd like to welcome once again Andrea Edwards and Dr. Beatrice Kastrati. Just a little information about Andrea Edwards. Andrea is an integrative psychotherapist who has been working in the field of mental health for over 10 years. Andrea has worked with vulnerable young people, adults, and also families. However, on the other side, she's a proud mother of two. We've also got Dr. Beatrice Kastrati, who's been with us before, and she works as the NEC Health Ministry Director. The next voice that you will hear this evening is no other than Andrea Edwards. Andrea, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to start with covering some topics on mental health. Because mental health is so big, I'm going to try and narrow it down to three main topics, which is going to be looking at children and young people, new moms, and also men's mental health, and then elaborate from there depending on time. So I'm going to just start with not assuming that everyone knows what we're talking about when we say mental health, even though, you know, most of us probably do. But so mental health is basically our well-being, our ability to be able to cope with everyday's jobs, life stresses, and just being able to just enjoy life, you know, work home and balance that. In terms of looking at the impact of COVID on mental health, ill mental health is when things becoming too overwhelmed for people. You know, they start feeling either under pressure, they struggle to sleep, anxieties, and different type of mental health related issues or sickness then starts developing. So I'm going to start off with talking about children and young people. I know, Juliet, you're going to intervene at different points, so feel free. But to begin with, I'm going to share my screen, if that's okay. Because I thought it would be quite nice to actually look at some statistics. So since COVID, and this is Young Minds is a charity that basically advocate and provide services for children and young people. They're actually the UK's leading charity for children and young people out there. So I'm gonna start with looking at two of their surveys. Since COVID, they've actually done 4, which you can find on their website, which is youngminds.org.uk. I'm not going to go through the full survey, just some of the key points. So if anyone wants to have a look or go through it further, they can on their website. So the first thing that I wanted to look at was the first survey they carried out was on the 20th of March, which was the day after school closed to all children. And then again on Wednesday, the 25th of March, which was when, you know, the restrictions became tighter. So they wanted to see how COVID was impacting on children and young people, and what their experience were at that time and the challenges that they were facing. So as you can see, I don't know if everyone can see my screen, but 32% agreed that COVID's actually made their mental health worse. And these were children and young people who were already engaging with mental health services. So 32% said it made it worse. 51% agreed that their mental health was a bit worse. So it wasn't completely worse, but it was a bit worse. 9% said it made no difference to their mental health. 6% said that their mental health had become a bit better. And only 1% said that their mental health became much better. And I'm gonna explain why I'm starting with this in a minute. So if I scroll up, we're going to look at the latest one. They've done 4 over, since lockdown, so 4 different ones. And it's quite interesting when you look at all 4, but I'm just going to look at the first one and the latest one. So the latest one, young people were saying, you know, this was mainly looking at, again, how it was impacting on everyone, but the main themes were loneliness, isolation, concerns about school or college, and just a breakdown in routine in general. So I didn't mention how many people they surveyed the first time, but it was over 2,000. And out of 2,438 young people aged 13 to 25, 75% agreed that the current lockdown made things much more difficult for them to cope. And this is 44%, it's 44% more than those who said it was harder the first time as well. 67% believe that the pandemic will have a long-term negative impact on their mental health, and 79% of respondents agree that their mental health would start to improve when restrictions have lifted. So already that kind of gives you an idea of how it's impacted on children and young people. For me, I'm actually going to take it a bit further and actually say babies as well, babies, children and young people. So babies, infant, toddlers, that's a group that we tend to kind of overlook because we think, oh, they're babies, you know, they don't start to feel yet, or toddlers, what do they know about mental health? But mental health is important for everyone from you know, conception right up until you pass away, basically. Mental health is really important. And the reason I want to kind of highlight babies as well is because how the mother feels or how the parents are, that has a direct impact on the children as well. So already it's difficult for, and I'll touch on this more in the when we talk about newborns and moms, but already it's difficult for babies when they come into this new world and it's completely, you know, it's new to what they're used to. On top of COVID, here comes additional pressures and struggles from the parents within the homes. And it's the same for the children and young people as well. You know, I remember at first, because I currently work in 2 schools, and at first the children were excited, we're going to be home, yay. But I don't think they understood at that time, and I don't think we did as well as adults, the impact or how severe it was having lockdown. And for a lot of the young people that I was working with, routine was the biggest struggle. You know, not having that routine in place where they, you know, they had somewhere to go, a reason to get out of bed, you know, and the social aspect, seeing their friends. So there's just in a nutshell, there's so many issues that cause COVID to negatively impact on the children and young people. And what I'm going to start with is more looking at how young people have been coping. So from different surveys that I've read through, and from the children and young people I've worked with, and even my own little girl and her friends, from those different conversations and reading different articles, the main thing that keeps coming up is one, concern about the future. What's going to happen when, you know, everything goes back to normal? Is everything going to go back to normal? What's going to happen with their education? Another of the common theme that kept coming up as well, like I mentioned before, was the lack of routine. And for people who already struggled with mental health difficulties, that massively made things worse. You know, the routine was something that was kind of keeping them going, keeping them distracted. But not having that in place, young people had more time to think. Even though households were home, you know, you had parents having to work from home. So they were home, but maybe not necessarily there as well. And children were spending more time in their rooms. They weren't playing out as much. Well, they couldn't play out compared to before. And all that just massively impacted. And in terms of what people were using to cope, from the research that I did, the main thing was social media. And again, as much as that was a positive thing on the one hand, it was also negative on the other hand, because everyone was just looking at images on social media which weren't necessarily reality. And they're seeing other people maybe looking a certain way, and they don't feel they're looking that, you know, in the way they should, or cyberbullying increased, just so many things around social media. And I think one of the areas that I think is important to highlight, is important to parents especially, is internet safety, because children are spending so much more time on devices. Are we really checking, you know, what they're spending their time on, who they're talking to? There's so many more scams out there as well for children and young people. And I think it's really important if we could prepare them for that, you know, talk to them about things like that as well.
Andrea, can I just ask you a quick question?
Yeah, feel free.
So, you know, you're talking about social media, but I'm just wondering, how do parents, rather than taking the device away, how do they safely manage that? And, you know, sometimes it's a battle between parents and their young people about how much time you're allowed on the internet, how much time you're allowed to surf and search social media. And as you said before, social media is having a major impact on young people's lives, about the way that they look. They're not wearing certain clothing. So I'm just wondering, can you just elaborate a little bit more about that?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I think in terms of parents, you're correct. It's before COVID, it was a battle anyway. And in my experience, one of the things that was coming up a lot when I was working with, let's say, children and families, it was not mainly, but one of the issue was social media. That's one of the top issues, and that battle, and it, you know, breaking down in relationships because of it as well. I think the approach is really important. I think sometimes we underestimate how much children understand or would understand if we sit down and talk to them, you know, rather than just saying, right, you're not having this, or that's it now, without an explanation. Because it's very much, I'm the adult, you're the child, do as you've been told. I think the approach is really important, and especially in today's day and age where things are so different to when I was a kid. You know, it's very different. Things that adults did when I was a kid would be classed as abuse now. So I think communication is really important. If you were to sit down and explain to that young person why it's not good for them to be on for so long, or you know, why you're doing what you're doing, they might kick off or whatever, but don't underestimate what the message you're sending to that young person. Because I've worked with children who they've come into the therapy room because they've been referred for let's say challenging behaviour, and the person who's made a referral, whether it's a teacher, a parent, or a support worker or a key worker, they'll put what they think the issue is and what they can see the issue is. And I'll say 9 times out of 10, if not more, what they've put as the issue is actually not the issue. And when that young person comes in and feels safe enough to actually open up, one of the common themes that I've had is children feeling that their parents really don't care. And one of the things that I remember a young person actually said to me, which really took me by surprise, for him, one of the issues which was relating to his anger outburst was the fact that he had no boundaries at home. There was no boundaries. If he wanted to get up at 11 o'clock in the night and go out, he could do that. His parents was really chilled. And I was shocked, because you have kids saying their parents are too strict, and he was saying that was an issue for him, why he had so much anger on the inside. But when we explored it further, the anger was really, they wanted to know that the parents cared. And I remember this comment that this young person said was, which parent would actually allow their child to be out at that time of night, at that age? You know, which parent who cared about their child would And that was a real eye-opener for me, because I never really thought about it like that, I guess. And I think in terms of the social media, social media is a thing of the century now. It's always gonna be there. And I think more and more things is becoming more electrical. So it's going to be a battle, but I think the approach is really important. The approach that parents use is really important. I think if they also make time for family activities, I know especially in COVID, it's difficult to, let's say, go places, but there's so many things you could do for free. You could play games around the table. You could go for walks together, just this bike ride together, just small things. I think people shouldn't underestimate how important those things are, and that in itself can actually take them away from, you know, the devices. And from my own personal experience as well with my little girl, she absolutely loved her iPad. And to tell her, when we tell her, okay, enough is enough now, she always kind of complained for a bit at first. But one of the positive things from COVID was we were doing a lot more outdoor activities in terms of walking. She was going bike riding more. And I think that in itself kind of replaced the iPads and, you know, the TV. So I think having something that you can replace it with is also important, so that then you're not just taking it away from them and they have nothing to do.
Okay, Andrea, are we saying that social media then is important? You've said kind of that it's relevant, but if a child has or young person has mental health issues, is the social media going to impact that more? And what are the signs and symptoms that parents should be looking for?
Okay, so I'll address the first one, which is it relevant? Social media, I guess it's a tough one, because ideally I wish there was no social media, but society now, it's all about social media, and there are positives to, you know, social media. You know, I've watched seminars on Facebook. People use social media as ways of starting their own business. There are positive ways to use social media, and I think just like everything else, it's how it's used. But for example, for children, young people who, let's say, if social media is making their mental health worse, I think that in itself says, okay, social media isn't a good thing for you. And it's trying to enable our young people to be able to be self-reflective, and to also be able to be attuned with what's going on for them. And also, and if you know, if we see that they're struggling with that, then okay, that's when parents take it away, you know, take it away. But I guess the difficulty in, if, let's say, for example, you social media is making it work. Let's say Instagram is making a young person's mental health worse because they're comparing with other people, and especially today, you know, there's so many filters, and what is out there isn't reality. I think the more we educate our children and young people, the better it is for them, because what you can ban from home, they can access with their friends, they can access at school, they can access at, you know, friend's house. So I think what I would say is really crucial is that education behind it. One of the things, and not just parents, schools, I think parents and schools and mental health charities, for example, should work together to educate children, because social media does advertise something that is not reality, it's not realistic, where people look perfect every day. And I think one of the things that we should try and educate our young people is no one is perfect. And if we all look the same, then that would be so boring. But to a young people, that makes no sense, because they want to look how everyone else is looking. They want to be popular, and it's what's important to them. So I think trying to educate people in terms of about filters, about, you know, reality, and from very earlier on, you know, put in the messages about self-love, you know, self-care, the importance of accepting you. And I think parents are the first, parents are the first people children come in contact with. And I think that's where the home is really crucial, because you need to show acceptance and love from home for that to, you know, for young people to have a solid foundation. In terms of your other question, which is what kind of signs and symptoms to look out for, it varies, but I would say, you know, I would say parents do know their children. And if you notice, let's say, for example, teenagers are being more strappy or grumpy, or they're spending a lot more time in the room, take an interest. Don't put it down to, oh, they're teenagers, so it's the norm, or, you know, or even with younger children, 2-year-olds, oh, it's just the tantrum twos. Take an interest in what's going on for your children. Don't assume. I think one of the other biggest thing that we tend to do in society as a whole is assume. We make assumptions, and our assumptions can be from our own perspectives, you know, what we would do in certain situations, or how we feel when we were that age, or what we experienced when we were in school, for example. And we'll base the assumptions on our own experience and make that factual. So I would say, in terms of the signs and symptoms, if you notice that your young person is spending too much time online, or they're displaying challenging behaviours like they're constantly angry or they're moody. You know, don't just assume it's teenagers or it's just kids, or have that conversation with them. You know, have that conversation with them and actually ask them, take that interest and ask them. You'd be surprised what they would actually say. And even if they don't say, don't just stop. You know, if they don't say the first time, don't stop. Just keep showing that interest, show that you care. And another major thing I think for parents to look out for is behavior is communication. Well, regardless of whatever the behavior is communication, and that's the same for babies, which is a topic I'm really big on, where people just say, oh, you know, he needs to learn to cry, and I'm not I'm not going to debate that, but even babies communicate by crying, and they communicate for a reason, whether that's because they want to be picked up, or they want to go to sleep, or they want food, or they want changing. And yet there are some babies who you'll do all that and they're still crying, but behavior is communication. And I think that's really important.
Thank you for that, Andrea. You've just hit a subject there about babies. And I know we've spoken a little bit about this, but what do you think the impact of COVID has had on new mums, mums to be, their mental health around that? Because services has been withdrawn or closed, so it's not quite accessible. You know, where there was parenting groups or nurturing groups for new moms, they just don't exist anymore. You've got to go online for stuff. So how do you think that's impacted on new mums or mums to be?
Interestingly, actually, I'll try and share my screen, if you don't mind, again, because I myself, I'm a new mum again, for the second time, and this is just 4 quotes that I have got from 4 new mums, and then I'll elaborate. So for one person, she said that it was so frustrating that my baby's dad couldn't be at the scan. I thought that was wrong, and it was very upsetting for both of us, especially being first-time parents. Another mom said, not being able to see family or friends, or have a proper baby shower was the worst part for me. I felt like I missed out on a lot of support and also felt very isolated. Another person, and these are all new mums who are friends, excuse my grammar. Another mum said, for me, it was being pregnant during COVID and couldn't see my friends and family for emotional support and well-being. My partner was not being able to attend the scans, definitely had an impact on him bonding with her now. The time I needed him the most, that should say most, he couldn't be there because he wasn't allowed to be. That massively impacted on both our well-beings. And the 4th person said, I really struggled to cope as a single mom and having to stay away from my parents because they were vulnerable. I was so tired and almost broke down. I just needed a bit of support. In the end, I took my babies to my mum's and left just so I could get some sleep. So that kind of gives you that you can see from those 4 different people, the theme is very similar. So the impact of COVID has been very negative. And for me personally as well, I was pregnant during lockdown, and it felt like it was just me having my little boy. It was just me who was having the baby. It was only me who could go to the scans. And it was just a lot. It just felt very lonely and very kind of isolated. And after he was born as well, in itself, that was stressful for many reasons. And I think with the withdrawals of services, including health visitors coming to the houses and midwives, being able to go out and meet other mums, I think that massively impacted on especially new parents as well, thinking, you know, some people question, are they good moms? Are they bad moms? I had a friend who she just became a new mom, and she said, I feel like I'm just the worst mom ever. And when I spoke to her, the things that she was struggling with was what I would say were the norm as a new mom, which was she wasn't able to get her little girl to sleep, or when she got her dive, she was constantly awake, which is, you know, very much the norm. And I think if those services were open and being able to access those services, should actually realise, should be reassured that actually it's not just me, other mums are going through the same thing. And that in itself can actually massively impact on your mental health positively, because you get that reassurance that, okay, I'm not being the worst mum in the world, my baby doesn't hate me. So yeah, I think you know, it's been really, really tough for parents. And I get it for me as well. It's, you know, luckily my little boy is my second child, so it wasn't as bad because I had something to kind of compare it to. But even saying that, he's very different to my little girl. And not having the external support like families and friends, that was really tough as well. And I think for people who already have mental health difficulties, you know, that would have made them more fragile, I would say.
Okay. Andrea, you know that we've got so many questions coming in. I don't even think we're going to have time to run through it all. But somebody's asking, is there a difference between men and women of how the COVID situation has impacted their mental health? Is there a marked difference between them?
I definitely think there is. And I'm going to go back again. I'm going to link it to my experience working with families and working with children and young people. So post-COVID, a lot of the work that I did with children and young people led back to the home. And the work that I did with the home was very different for the man and for the woman. And it's interesting because, you know, it depends on the culture as well, because I think culture plays a part, but society paint what it means to be a man as someone who's strong and someone who's able to take care of the family and able to provide and almost not show emotions. You know, that's kind of been the hidden image or message that's been portrayed for so long in society. And I know that there's more awareness out there now, and you know, there's let's say male celebrities who are openly talking more about mental health. But I think that expectation is still there that men should hold it together, and women, it's okay for women, for example, to be emotional, to cry, or to struggle, but it's almost not okay for the man to be. And I think, especially with so many COVID affected so many businesses, and a lot of men that I've also worked with during COVID, and this was volunteering, and friends that I've spoken to as well, the biggest impact for them was not being able to provide for their families, or not being able to have that certain, not being able to be sure that they'll be able to provide in the future. So I definitely think it massively impacted on men and women differently. I think women are more open, and women will speak more openly with friends and families, whether that's via phone or text messages. Women are more willing as well to seek professional help than men. That's that in terms of my experience and some of the research that I've come across, and this is an assumption, but I do think post-COVID, more women will be coming through than men. And I think a lot of that is to do with that social expectation and the pressures that I guess we as a whole put on men, or even the pressures that men put on themselves as well. And I think it should be, we do try to advocate that it is okay for men to struggle. It is okay for them to show emotions. It's not a sign of weakness, but depending on their upbringing, that might be seen as a sign of weakness, and that's where the difficulties come.
Andrea, we're really running out of time,
Yeah.
but I just want to ask you, if there's one thing that you could give to a man, one strategy that he could use, what would that be?
Ooh, interesting. If there was one, honestly, I would want to say communication. Right. I think with everything, communication is key, because, and I'm going to speak from personal experience in my relationship. My partner doesn't like talking about worries. He likes to internalize things, he likes to work things out himself in his head. But I think open communication with someone, and whether it's your partner or your dad or a stranger, with someone, I think that would be so beneficial. And just to wrap it up, the amount of men who I've worked with who, when they come into, let's say they come into therapy, they don't come because they want to. It's either forced because of the children or it's forced because of the partner. And by the end of the first session, they're willing to come the next time, because talking isn't that bad after all.
Okay. Andrea, I'm going to have to stop you there. If we've got time at the end, I'm going to ask you the same question in relation to women.
Okay.
But we'll see what time we have towards the end. So I want to thank you so much for your input and the information that you've given us. I'm going to rapidly move over to Dr. Beatrice. Dr. Beatrice, are you there?
I'm here, yes, hello.
Hello, hi, good evening to you. The floor is yours, it's open to you now.
Thank you very much. And first of all, Andrea, this was such an interesting presentation. And I'm also, as a mom of a 5-year-old, I could relate to so many things that you told, and it was so real. And also from your own experience, I really appreciated that. Thank you so much. It was such a wonderful presentation. I really enjoyed it. Let me quickly share my screen here as well. I just also want to present you with a few studies of what happened in the past year. So I'm going to introduce to you a few studies that I've researched, what happened during the pandemic. So the consensus in literature was that mostly young people experienced a declining mental health during the pandemic, like Andrea already said. And unfortunately, the people in the groups with the most mental health problems, they were in the most deprived neighborhoods, along with, of course, ethnic minority groups. And of course, more likely were the people who had pre-existing mental or physical health conditions, and they were also more likely to be Asian, Black, or of mixed ethnicities. So interestingly, 2/3 of adults in general were not affected and were largely unaffected by the pandemic. And but we also know from the studies that the unaffected groups were more likely to be older, white, and from the least deprived areas, and men being especially likely to have consistently very good mental health. Now, a disclaimer here, because Andrea already mentioned that men are not very good at communicating their mental health problems. So there might have just been an omission here that men just have not communicated if they did have problems or not. So in general, the number of people with symptoms of anxiety or depression rose from 1 in 5 before the pandemic to 1 in 4. So it's a significant increase of people with mental health problems. But it's also interesting, the psychological distress was highest in April 2020, and then it declined again. So by September, everybody had apparently gotten used to it or gotten over it. So the studies said, okay, it was really bad in the beginning, but then it kind of leveled out again. It's interesting, most of the studies, also the studies that were checking for healthy habits and for mental health habits, they were reminiscent of the Adventist health message. And the studies that I'm going to talk about and going to introduce to you tonight, they're mostly looked at the exercise principles, being outdoors and catching lots of air and sunlight, getting enough sleep, and also staying away from toxic substances. So, of course, we know that from the Ministry of Healing, pure air, sunlight, abstention, rest, exercise, proper diet, water, and a trust in the divine power are the true remedies. And surprisingly, they are also the remedies for good mental health. And it's always good to remind ourselves that keeping healthy habits is actually a very good practice. We talked earlier about routines, that the lack of routines during lockdown was actually a factor to decrease mental health. So having healthy habits also includes having a healthy routine. So there we go. We can actually influence our mental health. I'm going to introduce to you 2 UK studies that were surveys with lots and lots of participants. One was the Zoe COVID symptom study, and it's a study app, basically. It's an app that you can download on your telephone, and it was launched early on last year, during the pandemic, and collected lots and lots of data. But the mental health survey was launched recently, and it had more than 700,000 people who responded via the telephone app. Then we also have the second study, that it's a longitudinal study, Understanding Society. And it also sent surveys out through a representative group in the UK with lots and lots of participants, and made the results very representative. So the results were consistent, of course, also with the other studies that I have talked to you about in the literature review. So what do they focus on? They also focus on the pillars of resilience. So I talked to you about New Start principles, and the New Start principles, they would go into the self-care pillar of resilience and the self-awareness pillar here, and probably also the mindfulness one and the purpose one. So these are the 5 pillars of resilience that help us, that we can build in order to improve our mental and physical health. Resilience is also important to know, can be practiced and can be learned and can be developed by maintaining healthy habits. So what were the actual results, the full results of those studies, of those 700,000 participants? How did they respond? Well, it turned out being more physically active and exercising more was associated with lower anxiety and depression levels. And then, of course, spending more time in green spaces, outdoors, in the parks and the countryside was associated as well with lower anxiety and depression scores. So anybody who spent time outdoors and who was exercising outdoors actually had better mental health. Interesting, sleep and relaxing versus screen time. Yes, we talked about social media and screen time earlier. And I can also, again, totally relate. My daughter and her iPad are sometimes very difficult to part, but it is actually a scientifically proven that screen time decreased and had a negative impact on anxiety and depression. So spending more time using devices with screens was associated with higher anxiety and depression scores. But of course, opposed to that, sleeping well and practicing relaxation techniques instead, that was actually associated with lower levels of anxiety and depression. And then, yes, we have to say it, toxic substances, temperance. So snacking, eating more and smoking or vaping and consuming alcohol. surprise, surprise, was not good for you. So people who actually decided to turn their lives around to develop healthier habits and eating fewer snacks, they actually also reported lower anxiety and depression scores. Now, we don't really know if it's a correlation or causation, because we have to be careful here. Is it because those people were already more decided about their lives, more optimistic about being able to turn their lives around, or was it actually a cause that because they were dieting and because they were eating less snacks, they had better mental health? So we have to be careful there what kind of association we bring here. But it was also shown that smoking or vaping was associated with higher anxiety and depression. And then, of course, drinking less alcohol improved mental health. Some people think that drinking alcohol to calm the nerves or smoking to calm the nerves is a good idea. Well, I can tell you also from other studies, this is not a good idea and it is not good. So please abstain and try to be healthier in your habits. But what actually had a good impact was socializing and catching up with friends and family, either online or, of course, in person. Some people did have the time to talk more to friends and family on the phone, and therefore also had lower anxiety and depression levels. But of course, face-to-face interactions, you can't beat those. And unfortunately, not everybody was able to meet face-to-face. And we do know the restrictions really did impact that face-to-face interaction. And unfortunately, we did hear that people were unable to access services that would have given them the social support they needed. Then, of course, engaging with organization and social clubs was associated with lower anxiety and depression, which is an engagement with social clubs. Well, one of them, church. I can tell you that people who are in a group setting, in a setting with people who are like-minded, who are sharing the same goals and the same values, that actually does have a positive impact on mental health. Now, interesting question. Did having COVID-19 actually affect mental health? Because we do know that COVID-19 did affect the brain in some cases and caused sudden confusion or delirium or brain fog. And of course, there was a concern that having had or undergone COVID might have had an impact on mental health. Well, it did not. That's the good news. There was just a very small increased risk of anxiety and depression if you underwent COVID in the past. So the effect of a COVID infection was really minimal compared to other factors like pre-existing mental health conditions or pre-existing medical conditions. So let's face forward. Where do we go from here? Where does it take us? We can probably say that there's no evidence of a new wave of severe mental health problems as a result of the pandemic. We do know that there was an increase in mental health problems, but we also know it has leveled out again. But we also need to be aware that the disruption of our daily lives, the disconnection with people, and of course grief, they did leave a footprint and a mark in our own mental health. Many people have come out of this traumatized and with scars. So we do need to be aware of our own mental state. When we move forward into the future, we might be more vulnerable and not be aware of it. So it is important to get professional help when needed. And of course, yes, I have to say it's better to seek help early rather than suppressing it or downplaying symptoms. And here we go again into the men's health. Communication is important. Communicate with your partners, communicate your problems, and seek help, because it is really important to prevent further deterioration. Of course, there are services available in all areas, and the one service that's always there is the GP. So if you're worried about your mental health, you can always see the GP and refer to any kind of mental health program. This is the study app. It's still there. You can still download it and use it and continue giving input in further studies. It's very interesting to take part in this. These are all the resources. There's plenty of resources available, what the pandemic did to our mental health, and we do know it did leave a mark. So I just want to say that it is so important to be aware of our mental state. Awareness and mindfulness is important to communicate to partners, to carers, to our friends and family, because once we know what bothers us, we also can change it and we can work on things. And communicating not only with partners and not only with friends, but I have to say it again, communicating with God, laying our problems and our things in prayer before the throne is such an important thing to do. So I ask you to please be aware, to please be careful and mindful of what is going on in your life, and to open up to your friends, to your family, and to God. Thank you.
Beatrice, thank you for that. There's so many questions that I can ask between yourself and Andrea. There's lots of questions coming through. Somebody just wanted to know a little bit more about how do you manage end of life when you're told that your parents or somebody is at that point of end of life, and the impact on that on the family. If somebody can just answer that quickly, please. Beatrice, do you want to answer that?
Well, I'm not a specialist in psychology, but I could answer you how I would cope with this, because obviously my parents are elderly, very elderly to be honest, and they're not here. I was not able to visit them at all because my parents are in Germany and I haven't not seen them in 1.5 years now. And before I lived with them in the same house. And of course, now I'm quite concerned and we try to stay in touch, of course, but my mother was hospitalized twice in the meantime. And I cannot tell you how much heartache this causes and how difficult it is to cope with this. And of course, we do have to come to grips with the fact that life ends and that we might lose and will lose our loved ones. Now, what gives me hope and what gives me comfort, even though that is difficult, but it gives me hope and comfort that we will see each other again. When I turn to the Bible and when I look at the promise that we've been given, that a place is waiting for us with no tears, with no illness, with no grief, that is a wonderful promise to have. And I hold fast to that promise because I know whatever happens, my parents will be waiting there for me. And even though there is pain now, those tears will be wiped away.
Thank you for that. Andrea, question to you. Why do young people want to spend time on their own?
That's a good question, because I think, do they actually want to spend time on their own, or is that an assumption? From my experience, I would say it's an assumption that they do want to spend time on their own. Or if young people, if they do say, "Oh, leave me alone," it's, sorry, my little boy is here.
That's fine. Yeah.
It's because they don't really feel understood. And I think there is so much power in feeling heard. And I guess in my experience, the main theme with when you come to therapy, it's about feeling heard, because the amount of times people say, "What is therapy going to do?" Because talking to a shrink is what I hear a lot, isn't going to help, or talking to a stranger isn't going to help. But it's amazing, and it's shocking how much just feeling heard makes a massive difference. And a lot of the times kids just say, "Leave me alone," because they don't feel you're going to understand, or they don't think you actually care. So I think showing that you do care and actually listening so you can understand will make a massive difference.
Thank you. Another question's come in about finance. How does finance impact on mental health?
Well, in literature review, of course, I came across many statements, but also, of course, in experience, through pastoral care. My husband obviously is a pastor as well, and of course, financial worries do impact mental health quite a lot, and just the pressure of certain things not being in your control can really unsettle you. So of course, financial problems and having to change jobs. I lost my job during the pandemic, my previous job before I was appointed health director. That definitely has an impact on mental health and can make you feel unsuccessful, worthless. But it is important not to fall into these traps to say, I am terrible, I'm worthless, I failed, because this is not this is not true. It's not the reason. The problem is the problem, I like to say, because the reason there were financial difficulties or people lost their jobs was actually the pandemic. So it is important to build yourself up, to still believe in yourself and to say, I am okay, and things will go on somehow, even though this is very difficult.
Thank you.
I agree. Can I add to that, if you don't mind, as well?
Yeah.
I completely agree with everything you've just said. And I think one of the other thing I wanted to add is, a lot of people see their role as, well, it's what defines who they are. So without that, then that leaves this overwhelmed feeling of, well, who am I? Who am I without, this role? And that in itself can massively impact on someone's mental health, because they have to now try and find who they are. And I think it's really important for people to to kind of separate themselves from their roles and remember that they're a person, before they were a person before that job, and they'll continue being that person even after that job.
Thank you. Beatrice, I think in the research that you highlighted talked a little bit about race, ethnicity, and I'd like to just pose the question, how impactful was COVID on race and ethnicity? Either of you can answer that.
Well, it highlighted that there are health disparities. And probably those health disparities had been ignored before or not really taken seriously. And now during the pandemic, it was very clear that there were very obvious health disparities. And I would even say, and go so far, it was a good thing that those disparities were now shown and put into the spotlight, because now we know what we can work on and how to move forward, because those health disparities are a wake-up call. And it is very, very important to now really focus on interventions, because we've seen who has been affected and we've also seen who has not been affected. So now we know how to tailor health programs. We know how to tailor mental health programs and interventions and initiatives. And now we know we have a to-do list.
Yes, the evidence is there, isn't it? Yes, thank you. Andrea, would you like to add to that?
I to be honest, I completely agree with what you said. I think the other thing is as well, it's a wake-up call to not just people in power. I think people in power already knew, possibly, but if not, then like you say, it's been highlighted even more, and it's been highlighted even more to the public as well. So it is a wake-up call, and it shows, it kind of, I guess it opens a path for where the interventions needed and where the focus need to be and where the fundings need to go as well.
Yeah, great. Another question for you, Andrea. Somebody's asking, are we labeling children and young people too much?
Maybe my focus today has been more on children and young people, but in general, it's not just children and young people who's been affected. I'd say if I had the entire day, I would be able to touch on just women in general, men in general, you know, different ethnic groups and different cultures. But I guess for me, the reason why I'm very passionate about children and young people, and I think everything almost kind of ties around them as well. So let's say, for example, how I am as an adult, if I have children, my mental health state is going to impact on them. And you know, the systems around children, young people, and children, young people are going to be, you know, they're the future. So I guess my passion is with children and young people, but in terms of how COVID's impacted, it's massively impacted on everyone.
So the behaviour that young people and children may go through, and we see it as, I'm going to say naughty.
Yeah.
Could that be just normal behaviour and what we expect from young people and children? Or are we over...
is it over reading into things?
Yes.
I still stand by, you know, the fact that behaviour is communication. You know, children behave. There's this really good book, you know, and it basically, in a nutshell, what it says is when the adult change, the child change. And I'm not trying to put, you know, I'm not trying to now blame, you know, parents for, let's say, if children are seen as naughty. It's not about blaming, but when the adults change, children tend to change as well.
Sure.
I'm not gonna lie, I stand very much by the fact that, you know, behavior is communication. So regardless of whether a child is throwing a tantrum, they're communicating something. It might be, you know, you might see it as that child's being naughty, but what's happened, you know, why they behaving the way they're behaving. And it's not just children, it's adults, you know, everything impacts on us, and we tend to, you know, our behavior communicates something, you know, behavior is communication. Yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, sorry, just to add, can we think too much into behaviors? When you look in terms of labeling, maybe, but I'm not looking at it in terms of, okay, this person is behaving like this, therefore this person has got a condition, or this person has got a neurological something. It's just purely, what is that child communicating?
So is it about understanding the behaviour and how, understanding the behaviour and then communicating the positive impacts that you want to see the child?
Exactly. Yeah, it's exactly. So it's about understanding the child's behaviour. And, you know, I think sometimes for us as adults, emotions is really difficult for us to understand ourselves sometimes, or to even explain or express to someone else. How much more for a child, you know, and even young people, they go through so much. There's hormones, there's peer pressure, if family relationships, and even overhearing conversations, you know, parents' conversations, parents' worries, or having, you know, hearing a little thing of what a parent have said, they might magnify into a really massive worry, but they might not want to come to parents with that because they might see themselves as being a burden, or they don't feel they can talk to the parents, or they don't feel they can talk to anyone. And it all comes out in behaviour.
Sure. I think that's a big one though, isn't it? The conversations that we have as adults in front of children. And during the pandemic, during COVID time, we've had some conversations that maybe we shouldn't have.
Yeah.
And that would have had an impact on young people.
100%. 100%. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I just want to go back to Beatrice and ask you, in your slide, you show the 5 pillars of resilience. Can we just see that again, please? If you can.
Sorry. I'm just trying to find the slide again.
Okay.
Definitely. So the 5 pillars of resilience were important because they show how we can practice and build resilience in stressful and traumatic situations, and it helps us to bounce back. So obviously it is important to be self-aware. Like I said, it's important to be mindful of what is happening around us. If we're having negative thoughts that are all the time there, or if we are aware whether those negative thoughts are true or not, because like I said, somebody who might have lost their job might be consumed by negative thoughts of worthlessness, which are not true. So it is important to be, first of all, aware of this, what is happening with us and to us. And then we have to go counterclockwise here. Self-care is important, to seek help, to open up, to go to professional help, but also to open up to pastors, to good friends, to elders in the church, to peers, to relatives, because communication is the first step to getting better, but also caring for ourselves in the sense that being mindful of how we are and actually working towards that. If we say we're too stressed, probably we need some more relaxation. If we see that we do need healthier habits, it is time to build them. And then, of course, building relationships is important, and being in a social network that can catch us. And then mindfulness is important in terms of, again, being aware of our mental health, and then having a purpose in life, finding that purpose. So like Andrea earlier said, people might be completely defining themselves through their work, and then what if that work has stopped? Where is the purpose? So it is important to build purpose besides what we do, and find purpose of who we are, and basically centering ourselves away from the outside image, and really centering and looking into our own hearts and what is there.
Thank you. We're going to end shortly, but before we do that, I would just like to ask, can you give me something that is positive, the impact? How positive could it or should it have been on our lives? Beatrice, positivity.
Well, positivity is always important, and optimism. And again, people might think it sounds ironic or sarcastic, but I do not want to sound this way. Optimism is something that can be trained, it can be learned. It is like a muscle. Cognitive, Andrea will agree with me here, cognitive behavioral therapy focuses replacing negative thoughts with positive thoughts, practicing that. It is possible to do that. We just need to have the self-discipline to focus on the positive. A start is, for example, journaling, writing down 10 things we're grateful for every day. Another start is finding out what is positive in our relationships, to see the positives in our relationships and our partners. Also trying to see the positives outdoors in nature. We need to focus our minds to what is good. Because if we always focus on the bad, then we will spiral into a place where we do not want to go, into a very dark place. But we can have the discipline, we can actually shift our focus away from that. And if we need help with that, if this is difficult, then yes, a way of focusing on the positive is prayer. God can help us with this. Joy is a fruit of the Spirit. It is something that can be given to us when we ask for it. So I just always would encourage people to seek the Lord, to seek the Word, to seek Scripture, and to seek the Lord with all our hearts in prayer, because that is the one thing that can help us be more positive when we feel that we cannot out of our own strength.
Thank you.
I agree.
Andrea, would you like to end with something positive, please?
I think I'm going to mirror what you've said as well, Beatrice. And I think for me personally, lockdown has not been all bad. And the reason for that is more family time. I know that on the flip side, that can be, you know, we're sticking to positivity, but yeah, I think being around family is really important, and actually cherishing those people who you live with. If you do live with people, and like Beatrice said, it's really important to balance and to challenge negative thoughts, because negative thoughts aren't always correct, and if you leave that running, it will magnify, and most times it's so unrealistic and irrational anyway, and so far from the truth. One activity that I would recommend to everyone, and it seems really simple, but at tea time, we basically go around the table and we mention one thing we're thankful for that day, and one thing we're just thankful for in general. And, you know, my little girl might say something positive about school. For me, it might be the fact that Levi slept for longer that day. Just, you know, and the small things, and you can make it into a game, but it has such a massive impact.
Oh, wow. Andrea, Beatrice, I really want to thank you so much for this well-spent hour. You've exceeded our expectations, and you've just offered us so much. I really want to thank you for that. I'm going to hand back now to Leroy. Thank you once again.
I'd like to add my thanks to you as well, Juliet, and to Dr. Beatrice and to Andrea for your presentations and your thoughts this evening. And wow, 10 weeks has certainly seemed to have flown by. And I hope that maybe some of you will have been able to follow all of the 10 seminars of this series, where we've looked at in week 1 how you can protect yourself from frauds and scams, which was presented by the Greater Manchester Police Action Fraud Team. We then looked at how you differentiate between truth and conspiracy, which was presented by Dr. Beatrice. And then we looked at pornography and diction, practical support and resources by the Naked Truth Ministries. We looked at the long-term impact of COVID on education, which Beulah Blunkett led. We also looked at the world of online web opportunities and threats. That was presented by Mark Palmer. Dealing with Grief by Liebert Hughes. Early Detection of Cancer by Dr. Andrew Baildon. Prostate Cancer, What Men Must Know, presented by Liebert Hughes. How to Handle Our Debt and Fix Our Finances by JP Financial and Accounting. And then tonight's presentations, Impact of COVID-19 on Mental Health and Public Health, presented by Dr. Beatrice and Andrea. So as you can see, we've covered a wide range of topics and issues, and we hope that these presentations have been of great benefit to you. And as with all programs, there has been a lot going on behind the scenes. So I'd like to thank our technical team who have made sure that we're all connected and the technology is working properly as far as possible. Thank you again to all our presenters and moderators for giving of your time and sharing your expertise. And I'd like to thank our elder, Rosalind Combo, because as you are aware, these presentations have been produced by the Manchester North Seventh-day Adventist Church, and we firmly believe in the power of prayer, which Elder Combo has been leading. And finally, thank you to our pastor, Pastor Daniel. He has been the driving force behind these seminars and was passionate about a series of presentations that met the real needs of our community in these difficult times. And as we've had to cope with COVID, unemployment, dealing with our finances, and how this impacts our physical and mental health. So then, as we close, please watch out for Total Transformation Phase 3 in the not too distant future. Is that right, Pastor? So thank you again for journeying with us. Good night.